Sheriff Mace Drum had served the frontier for 22 years. He had seen colony wars, alien sieges, and things that don't have names in any human language. None of it prepared him for Redveil, because when he walked into the saloon on his first night, every single person turned to look at him. Not with curiosity, with fear. The bartender slid a glass across the counter, already poured, already waiting. And he said, "You ordered this last night, Sheriff. Don't you remember?" Mace Drum had been in hyperspace last night. He hadn't been anywhere near this planet, but someone had. Someone who looked exactly like him. And whatever that someone did between midnight and dawn, no one in Redveil would say a word. If you're new to Orbit Cowboy, ride with us. Saddle up and subscribe. Now, let's begin. The Galactic Frontier Authority posted Sheriff Mace Drum to Redveil Colony on the 4th day of the dry season, Galactic Standard Year 3214. The transfer order was thin, 2 pages, no mission brief, no threat assessment. Just a name, a set of coordinates, and a note stamped in red ink that read, "Immediate reassignment, no appeal." Drum read it twice in his quarters aboard the transit hauler Perseverance. He was 51 years old. His knees ached when the gravity shifted between decks. His hands, once steady enough to draw a sidearm in under half a second, now trembled when the air recyclers ran cold. 22 years on the frontier had carved deep lines into his face and removed something from behind his eyes that younger men still carried without knowing its name. He had been a sheriff on 11 different colony worlds. He had buried deputies, negotiated with warlords whose species had no word for mercy, and once walked into a burning outpost on Garan IV to pull out 14 children while the roof collapsed behind him. The Frontier Authority had given him commendations for that. He kept them in a drawer he never opened. Redveil was listed as a Class C settlement. Population, 1,140. Economy, lithium extraction and subsistence farming. Crime rate, 0. That last detail caught his eye. In 22 years of service, Drum had never seen a colony with a recorded crime rate of 0. Every settlement had something: a bar fight, a stolen generator, a domestic dispute that went sideways in the middle of the night. 0 meant either nobody was reporting, or somebody had decided that whatever was happening didn't count as crime. He asked the transit captain about Redveil. The captain, a Drexy merchant with scales the color of old copper, looked at him for a long moment and said nothing. Then she changed the subject. Drum arrived at Redveil's landing pad at dusk. The colony sat in a shallow canyon on a planet whose official designation was LV 7734, but whose residents called Quiet. The name fit. The air was still. The dust didn't move. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath, as if the atmosphere itself had learned that silence was safer than sound. The buildings were standard frontier construction. Prefab walls, corrugated roofing, solar panels tilted toward a sun that hung low and orange on the horizon. Nothing unusual, nothing wrong. But as Drum walked from the landing pad toward the main street, he noticed something that made the hair on the back of his neck stand up. Every window was shuttered. Every door was closed. It was dusk on a temperate world with breathable air, and not a single person was outside. He found the saloon by following the only light that leaked through the shutters. The sign above the door read, "The Long Dust," in letters that had been painted and repainted so many times. The words looked three-dimensional. Drum pushed through the swinging doors and stepped inside. 47 people were in that saloon. He counted them automatically. Old habit, older instinct. Miners, farmers, a few children too young to be left at home alone. They sat at tables and along the bar in the particular silence of people who have been waiting for something they don't want to arrive. Every single one of them turned to look at him. Not with curiosity, not with the cautious interest that frontier people usually showed a new lawman. They looked at him the way prey looks at something it recognizes. Their faces held a terror so familiar it had become permanent, like scar tissue that had replaced the skin underneath. The bartender was a tall woman with sun-darkened skin and hands that had done hard labor for decades. She stood behind the counter, polishing a glass that was already clean. When Drum approached, she set the glass down and slid another one across the wood toward him. It was already filled, amber liquid, 2 fingers neat, the exact drink he would have ordered if he had been given the chance. "You ordered this last night, Sheriff," the bartender said. Her voice was flat, controlled, the voice of someone who had practiced this sentence. "Don't you remember?" Drum looked at the glass. He looked at the bartender. He looked at the room full of people who had stopped breathing. "I was in hyperspace last night," he said. "I wasn't anywhere near this planet." The bartender held his gaze. Something moved behind her eyes. Not fear, not exactly. Something older. Something that had given up being afraid and settled into a kind of exhausted certainty. "I know," she said quietly, "but you were here." Her name was Sarah Voss. She had been bartender, de facto mayor, and the closest thing Redveil had to a historian for the past 19 years. She agreed to talk, but only after the saloon emptied, and only with every shutter bolted and every light dimmed to its lowest setting. They sat across from each other at a corner table. Drum's untouched drink sat between them like evidence. "3 sheriffs have been posted to Redveil before you," Sierra began. "The first was a woman named Harlow. She arrived on a Monday morning. By Wednesday, she had packed her kit and taken the next transport out. She never filed a report. She never spoke about this place again. The authority listed her departure as voluntary resignation." Drum nodded. He had seen similar entries in colony records. It happened. "The second was a man named Breck," Sarah continued. "He lasted 6 days. On the 5th night, he tried to burn down the chapel. Nobody was inside. He said he needed to see if the fire was real. He was recalled for psychological evaluation and never returned to active duty." "And the third," Sarah's hands tightened around her own glass. "The third was a woman named Tove. She lasted 3 weeks. Longest anyone held out. She was methodical. She documented everything. Recordings, sensor data, written logs. She was building a case to send to the authority. What happened? She disappeared. Not dead. We would have found a body. Not evacuated. Her ship was still on the pad. She simply wasn't here anymore. One morning, her quarters were empty. Her documentation was gone. Every recording, every log, every piece of evidence. The authorities sent a search team. They found nothing. They listed her as missing, presumed lost to environmental hazard." Drum let the silence settle. Then he asked the question that had been forming since the moment he walked through the saloon doors. "What happens at night?" Sarah looked at the shuttered windows as if she could see through them. "You arrive," she said. Drum did not sleep. He sat in the sheriff's office, a small room with a desk, a cot, and a weapons locker that held equipment 2 generations out of date. And he waited. He turned off the lights. He opened the shutters. He watched the main street of Redveil through glass that was scratched and clouded with age. At 2:17 a.m., local time, a figure walked out of the darkness at the far end of the street. Drum's hand moved to his sidearm before his conscious mind had processed what he was seeing. The figure walked slowly, deliberately, with the unhurried gait of someone who belonged exactly where they were. It moved under the faint glow of Redveil's emergency lighting, and as it passed from shadow into light, Drum saw its face. His face. The figure was him. Same height, same build, same weathered coat with the Frontier Authority badge pinned above the left breast, same boots, same holster, Same slight limp from the injury he'd taken on Garen the Fourth 7 years ago. It walked the way he walked. It carried its shoulders the way he carried his, slightly forward, as if leaning into a wind that wasn't there. But the eyes were wrong. Even from 30 meters away, through dirty glass, Drum could see that the eyes were wrong. They were his eyes, same color, same shape, same deep-set placement in a face that had seen too much sun and too little sleep. But behind them was something that shouldn't have been there. A depth, a weight, a knowledge of things that Mace Drum had not yet lived through. The figure stopped in the middle of the street. It turned and looked directly at the sheriff's office window, directly at Drum. Then it smiled. It was not a warm smile. It was the smile of someone who knows how a story ends and has decided not to tell you. The figure continued walking. It moved past the saloon, past the general store, past the row of miners' quarters where families were sleeping behind locked doors. It walked to the edge of the colony where the canyon walls rose like dark teeth against the starfield. And then it was gone, not vanished, just walked into the darkness at the colony's edge and didn't come back. Drum sat in his chair for a long time after that. His hand was still on his sidearm. His heart was beating at a rate that his body reserved for active combat situations. He had seen things on the frontier that would keep most people awake for years. He had faced alien predators and human criminals in situations where the line between the two was impossible to find. But he had never seen himself walking down a street in the middle of the night with eyes that knew something he didn't. Over the next 5 days, Drum documented everything. He borrowed sensor equipment from the mining operation. He set up cameras along the main street. He placed motion detectors at the colony perimeter. He recorded atmospheric readings, electromagnetic fluctuations, gravitational anomalies, anything that might explain what he had seen. Every night at 2:17 a.m., the figure appeared, and every night it did something different. On the second night, it went to the chapel, a small building at the colony's eastern edge that served as a meeting hall, a school, and according to Sarah, the only place in Redveil where people still gathered voluntarily. The figure entered and stayed for exactly 1 hour. When Drum reviewed the chapel's internal cameras the next morning, they showed only static during that hour. Clean footage before, clean footage after. 1 hour of nothing. On the third night, it visited every home in the colony, not breaking in, just standing at each door for precisely 45 seconds. Some residents reported hearing knocking. Others said they heard a voice through the walls, speaking words they couldn't quite make out. One miner, a man named Cade with hands like weathered stone, told Drum that the voice had said his name. Not his first name, his full name. The name he'd been born with on a world he hadn't visited in 30 years. A name he hadn't told anyone in Redveil. On the fourth night, the figure went to the mines. The lithium mines extended deep beneath the canyon floor. They were the colony's only economic asset, the reason Redveil existed at all. The figure entered Mine Shaft 7, the deepest and oldest shaft, which had been sealed 2 years ago after a structural survey declared it unsafe. Drum followed it. He told himself it was because he was a sheriff and sheriffs investigate. He told himself it was because, whatever this thing was, running from it hadn't helped the 3 lawmen who came before him. He told himself a lot of things as he descended into the shaft with nothing but a hand lamp and a sidearm that probably wouldn't matter. The shaft went down 400 meters. The air grew cold. The walls narrowed until Drum had to turn sideways to fit through certain passages. His lamp threw sharp-edged shadows that moved like living things. He found the figure at the bottom. It was standing in a chamber that should not have existed. The mine maps showed Shaft 7 ending in a collapsed wall at 380 meters. But beyond the collapse, or where the collapse should have been, was an open space the size of a cathedral. The walls were smooth, unnaturally so. They reflected Drum's lamplight in patterns that hurt to look at, as though the geometry was slightly wrong, slightly off from what human eyes expected. The figure stood in the center of the chamber. It was facing a wall on which something was written. Not carved, written, in a script that moved and shifted like liquid across the stone surface. Drum raised his lamp and his weapon. "What are you?" The figure turned. It wore his face perfectly. Every scar, every line, every imperfection. But the eyes held everything. "I'm what you haven't done yet," it said. And the voice was his voice, roughened by years he hadn't lived through. "The next chapter goes deep, partner. If this ride's keeping you company tonight, hit that bell. The story Mace Drum is about to walk into, you don't want to miss what comes next." The script on the wall was not any language the Frontier Authority had catalogued. Drum had served on 11 colony worlds and had encountered dozens of alien writing systems. This wasn't any of them. It moved. That was the part that made his hands shake. The symbols rearranged themselves continuously, like a river of meaning that never repeated the same pattern twice. "You can't read it," the figure said. It wasn't a question, not yet, but you will. Drum kept his weapon raised. "Start talking. What is this place? What's happening to Redveil?" The figure sat down on the chamber floor. The gesture was so ordinary, so human, that it was more disturbing than anything else. Monsters didn't sit down to have conversations. Monsters attacked or ran or did whatever the thing was that justified calling them monsters. "This chamber was here before the colony," the figure said. "Before the mines. Before humans came to this planet. It's old. Older than the canyon above us. Older than the planet's current geological period. Something built it. Something that understood time the way you understand distance." Meaning what? Meaning they could walk through it, move forward, move back, choose which moment to stand in the way you'd choose which room to enter. This chamber is what's left of their tools, a doorway they built and never closed. Drum processed this. His military training told him it was impossible. His 22 years on the frontier told him that the word impossible was just a label humans put on things they hadn't met yet. And you came through that doorway. I am what comes through it every night. Not a copy, not a ghost. A projection, a temporal echo. The doorway sends forward a version of whatever consciousness is closest to it. When Redveil was empty, nothing happened. When the colonists arrived, the doorway started projecting. Whoever slept nearest to Shaft 7 would see themselves the next night, a version from a few hours ahead, carrying memories of what came next. But the colonists don't project. I do. The figure smiled again, that terrible knowing smile, because you're the strongest signal in range. The doorway doesn't project just anyone. It projects the mind that carries the heaviest burden, the one that the future presses against hardest. Drum lowered his weapon slightly. "Why me?" "Because something is coming to Redveil, something that every version of you, from every possible future I've seen through this doorway, has to face. And most of those versions fail." The figure stood and walked toward the wall. It pressed one hand against the shifting symbols and they paused, froze mid-motion, as if held by force. "In 11 days, a Kreth war convoy will enter this system. 3 cruisers, 8 gunships, and a landing force of 400 soldiers. They're not here for the lithium. They're here for this chamber." Drum felt ice settle into his stomach. The Kreth Imperium was one of the frontier's most dangerous adversaries, a species that had fought humanity to a standstill in the border wars 30 years ago and had never signed a formal peace. If they wanted something in human space, they took it. And if humans were in the way, they removed them with the surgical efficiency of a species that had been waging war since before Earth's first civilizations learned to stack stones. The authority doesn't know about this chamber, Drum said. No, and you can't tell them. The signal delay to the nearest relay station is 14 days. By the time a message reaches anyone who matters, the Kreth will have already come and gone. Then I evacuate the colony. With what? The colony's transport shuttle holds 40 people. You have 1,140 colonists. Even if you packed them in beyond safety limits, you'd move 303 trips. That's 9 days of shuttle runs. You don't have 9 days. Drum looked at the figure, at himself, at the version of him that carried knowledge he hadn't earned yet. Why are you telling me this? The figure's expression changed, the smile disappeared. What replaced it was something Drum had seen only once before in his life, on the face of a man who was about to do something he knew he wouldn't survive. Because I've seen what happens when you don't know. In the timelines where you're not warned, you find out about the Kreth when their ships appear over the canyon. You try to fight. You're brave. You're always brave, every version of you. But brave doesn't matter when you're outgunned 400 to 1 with no time to prepare. And when I am warned, the figure paused. The symbols on the wall behind it began to move again, faster now, urgent. When you're warned, there's one timeline, one, where Redveil survives, one sequence of decisions made in the right order at the right time by a man who's willing to do something he'll never be able to explain to anyone afterward. Tell me. I can't tell you all of it. The doorway doesn't work that way. If I give you the full sequence, the timeline collapses. The future I came from stops existing, and so do I, and so does the information. I can give you one thing, one piece, then give it. The figure leaned close, close enough that Drum could see himself reflected in eyes that were his own, and not his own at the same time. Don't fight them, the figure whispered. Talk to them. What Mace Drum did in the next 11 days would never appear in any official record. No report was filed. No commendation was issued. The Frontier Authority would list the Redveil incident as a minor border dispute resolved through standard diplomatic channels, which was a lie so enormous it had its own gravity. On the first day, Drum went to the mines. Not Shaft 7. He sealed that with every lock and barrier the colony had. He went to the operational shafts and studied the geological surveys that Redveil's miners had been compiling for 19 years. He learned the canyon's structure. He memorized its weak points and its strengths. On the second day, he gathered the colony's leaders, Sarah Voss, Cade the miner, Dr. Pell, who ran the medical station, a woman named Asha who managed the power grid. He told them what was coming. Not the part about the chamber or the temporal projection, just the intelligence about the Kreth convoy. He expected panic. What he got was something that surprised him more than his own face walking through the dark. He got resolve. These were people who had lived on the edge of nothing for years. They had survived dust storms, equipment failures, supply shortages, and 37 nights of watching a version of their sheriff walk through their colony while they locked their doors and prayed. They were not soft. They were not weak. They were frontier people, and frontier people had a particular relationship with impossible situations. They didn't waste time being afraid of them. They got to work. On days 3 through 8, Redveil transformed. Drum organized the miners into engineering teams. They used their knowledge of the canyon to create a network of tunnels and shelters that could hide 1,100 people from orbital scans. They buried power signatures. They created false heat sources that mimicked occupied buildings. They made Redveil look alive from above while its actual population was hidden deep in the stone. Asha rewired the colony's power grid into something that hadn't existed before. A focused electromagnetic pulse emitter jury-rigged from mining equipment and solar panels. It wouldn't destroy a Kreth ship. It wouldn't even scratch one, but it could blind their sensors for exactly 9 seconds. 9 seconds in which Redveil's real population would disappear from every scan. On the 9th day, Drum did the hardest thing. He went back to Shaft 7. He went back to the chamber. The figure was there, as it always was, standing before the wall of shifting symbols. "I need you to do something," Drum said. "I know," the figure replied. "You need me to be you, up there, on the surface. When the Kreth arrive, can you?" The figure looked at the wall. The symbols were moving faster now, as if counting down. "I can be real enough. For one conversation, for 1 hour. After that, the doorway's energy dissipates, and I fade. But 1 hour should be enough. It has to be." They came on the 11th day, exactly as the projection had said. 3 cruisers dropped from orbit like stones thrown by a god. 8 gunships fanned out across the canyon rim. A landing craft settled on Redveil's main street with the precision of a species that had conquered worlds the way humans conquered rooms, by walking in as if they already owned them. Commander Orcs stepped off the landing craft. He was 7 feet tall, armored in plates of bone-white chitin that grew from his own body like an exoskeleton. His eyes were compound, thousands of lenses that processed light in spectrums humans couldn't perceive. His species didn't smile. They didn't need to. Their faces communicated dominance through stillness. Orcs expected to find a terrified colony. He expected begging, surrender, perhaps a token resistance that would justify the violence his soldiers were eager to deliver. He had done this 43 times on 43 worlds. What he found was a single man standing in the middle of the street, wearing a sheriff's badge, arms folded, waiting. "Commander," the figure said. Its voice was Mace Drum's voice. 22 years of frontier dust ground into every syllable. "I've been expecting you." Orcs' compound eyes processed the human. 1 man, no visible weapons, no military support, no fear scent, and the Kreth could detect fear the way humans detected sound. This human was not afraid. That was unusual enough to make Orcs pause. "You are the authority here?" Orcs asked. The translator rendered his words in flat, mechanical English. "I am." "Then you know why we have come. You're here for what's under the mountain, the chamber, the doorway." Orcs' stillness deepened. He had not expected the human to know. Intelligence suggested the colonists were unaware of what lay beneath their minds. "You understand its value?" Orcs asked. "I understand that your empire has been looking for it for 300 years. I understand that 6 Kreth expeditions have searched this sector and failed to find it. I understand that whoever controls that chamber controls something your species considers sacred, a connection to a time before the Kreth were what they are now, before the wars, before the Empire." Each sentence landed like a stone dropped into water. The ripples spread through the Kreth soldiers, who shifted and murmured in their own language. "You have studied us," Orcs said. "I've had 11 days to study everything." The figure stepped closer, close enough that a Kreth soldier could have killed it with a single strike. It did not flinch. "I know something else, Commander. I know that the chamber doesn't respond to force. Your scientists figured that out 2 centuries ago and classified the report because the implications frightened your high command. The doorway activates in the presence of consciousness, but only consciousness that carries weight, burden, memory, the kind that comes from protecting something, not from conquering it." Orcs was silent. The figure continued. "If you kill everyone in this colony and take the chamber, it goes dark. It becomes a cave. A room full of symbols you can't read, attached to a mechanism you can't activate. I am the only person on this world whose presence keeps it alive. Kill me, and you lose everything. Then we will take you. You can try, but I'm a temporal projection, Commander. I exist for approximately 47 more minutes. After that, I fade, and the real Sheriff Drum is somewhere you will never find him. Orthek's compound eyes flickered, a Kreth expression of deep calculation. What do you propose? I propose you leave. I propose that the Kreth Imperium and the Frontier Authority negotiate access to this site through proper channels. I propose that humans and Kreth study the chamber together. Because whatever built it wasn't human or Kreth. It was something older than both our species, and understanding it will require more than one kind of mind. The Imperium does not negotiate. The Imperium hasn't negotiated because it hasn't needed to. But this is different. This chamber is the only connection to your species' past that still exists. Your homeworld is gone. Your origin records were destroyed in the Fracture War. This doorway is all you have left. Drum's voice, the voice of a man who had buried enough people to understand loss. You're not here as conquerors, Commander. You're here because you're afraid of being forgotten. I understand that. Every human understands that. It's the one thing our species share. The canyon was silent. The wind that had held its breath for as long as anyone could remember seemed to be listening. Orthek stood perfectly still for a very long time. Then he spoke a single word in the Kreth language, a word that the translator didn't render because there was no human equivalent. It meant something between respect and recognition of an equal, and acknowledgement that the universe is larger than pride. He turned and walked back to his landing craft. The Kreth convoy lifted off 19 minutes later. They left Redveil standing. They left the colony intact. They left 1,140 people alive who should not have been, by every calculation of military logic and imperial doctrine. They left because a shadow had spoken to them with a dead man's voice and offered them something no weapon could provide, the truth. That was the sheriff whose shadow arrived first. The next one is already loading. Saddle up, subscribe, ring the bell, ride with us every week. And before you go, partner, drop a comment below. If you were Mace Drum, standing in that chamber with your own future staring back at you, would you have trusted what it said? Or would you have tried to fight your way out alone, the way every sheriff before you did? Until next time, keep your guns clean and your stars closer.